So I want this r to be all by itself. The problem is I have a pi right next to it and I have a 2 right next to it. Now this is all one giant term. Remember, terms are just separated by addition signs, subtraction signs, or equal signs. There's just straight up multiplication between this number 2 and pi and the pi and the r. So this is, again, one giant term. So 2 pi r. In order to get rid of this 2 times pi that's multiplying my r, again, I have to do the opposite of multiplication. So to undo this multiplication of 2 times pi that's multiplying my r, I have to do the inverse of that, which is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient in front of r, which happens to be 2 times pi. So I'm going to divide this side by 2 pi. On the left-hand side, I have to do the exact same thing then. I'm going to divide this side by 2 pi. So let's take a look at what that does. On the left-hand side, I have my variable c, circumference, all divided by 2 times pi. Nothing I can really do to simplify that. So circumference divided by 2 pi. I got my equal sign in the middle, and then on the right-hand side, I have 2 pi times an r, all divided by 2 pi. Again, this 2 on the top and 2 in the bottom, 2 divided by 2, is just 1. It's going to cancel each other out. Same thing with this pi. Pi on the top, pi on the bottom. Pi divided by pi, any number divided by itself is just 1. So they cancel each other out. And the only thing that's left on top is r. On the bottom, there is something left. It's really just a 1 since all these things canceled out to just be 1. So simply, I just have r on the right-hand side. And this is my solution now. I've manipulated this equation to get r by itself. R is always going to be equal to, in any circle, your radius is equal to the circumference divided by 2 times pi. Finally, number 3 here. It says solve for y. So I have y divided by 4, all equal to 8. Again, I need to get y by itself. What's with y that I need to get rid of? Well, it's this whole divided by 4 business. So I need to somehow undo this division by 4 to get y by itself. So I do the inverse of that. Well, what's the inverse of division? It's multiplication. So I'm going to multiply by 4. Because I have fractions on this side, I'm actually multiplying by 4 over 1. Same thing as multiplying by 4. So on the left-hand side, I multiply by 4. While on the right-hand side, I have to multiply by 4 to balance out my equation. The beautiful thing about this is when I do that on the left-hand side, I have a 4 on top and a 4 on the bottom. I essentially have 4 divided by 4, and that cancels out. 4 divided by 4 is just 1. So I'm left on this side with y all over 1, which is just simply y. I got my equal sign in the middle, and 8 times 4 on this side simplifies to be 32. 8 times 4 is 32. And I get my solution. Y is equal to 32. So let's take a look at how a similar problem, but in terms of like literal equations. So nothing but variables in this problem. And I'm being asked to get m all by itself, this variable m. So this m on top, I somehow need to get rid of this v on the bottom. Well, there's actually 2 ways that we could look at this problem. What I'm going to encourage people to do in class is like whenever you're given a fraction, because everybody's doing pretty well with ratios and proportions. So if you're given like a fraction on the right-hand side, turn the left-hand side into a fraction as well. So put that d over 1. And now we have 2 fractions, aka ratios. We have a fraction or a ratio on the left-hand side, and a fraction or a ratio on the right-hand side. And they're equal or proportional to one another. Okay, well, kind of similar to like this warm-up problem that we were looking at. If you have 2 fractions on either side of the equal sign or 2 ratios, like nothing but fractions, then you can use cross multiplication to solve. So let's use cross multiplication here. The first set that I have is 1 times m. And anything times 1 is just, it's whatever that other number is. In that case, it's a variable. So 1 times m is just 1m. and that's equal to the cross product of my other two items. So my other cross products are D and V. So I have some variable D multiplying some variable V. Again, it's kind of awkward to write this multiplication symbol, so we can kind of just get rid of it. So M equals D times V can just be written like this, no little dot or multiplication symbol in between. And that's what I was asked to do, solve for M. Hey, look, M is all by itself on the left-hand side of my equation. So what this is saying is the variable M is equal to all my other stuff is on the other side of my equation. I've accomplished what I need to accomplish. I've written this equation in terms of M. Let's look on the back-hand side. Got word problems. But don't be freaked out too much about this. There's a lot of words always in these like literal equation word problems, but there's very little that you have to really truly understand with all these words. Basically what you're looking at in literal equation word problems is what formula are you given. So let me try to use colors here. We're given this equation. A equals BH. And then the other thing that you really have to know is, okay, what variable do they want you to be solving for? What variable do they want alone? And that's usually in the last sentence. And here it says in the last sentence, determine the base dimension of her garden in terms of A and H. So we're looking for, okay, let's get this equation in terms of the base. Determine the base. So those are the two important things. Again, I didn't even read this problem because everything else doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and just read it, and then I'll kind of explain why it doesn't really matter, all those other words. But Ms. Jacobs is planting a rectangular vegetable garden. She uses the area formula, area equals base times height, to calculate the area A based on the base B and height H of her garden. Determine the base dimension of her garden in terms of A and H. I think all those words are very confusing. This is basically what the problem is asking for. Hey, it wants you to solve for this variable base, which is represented by B. So what variable are you trying to solve for? The letter B, which again means base in the formula. Okay, what equation are we using? They always give you the equation. They have to. Area equals base times height. A equals B times H. Okay, so we're going to take this equation. We're going to manipulate it a little bit in order to get the variable B alone by itself. So that's what this problem is asking. You don't have to worry too much about the vegetable garden, what all these words mean. So let's look at this equation. A equals B times H. Again, we're trying to get this variable by itself, B. So what's with B that we need to get rid of? Well, this other variable, H, is on this side. So we need to somehow get rid of this H. So again, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what are the B and the H doing to each other? Well, it's kind of invisible, but there's an invisible multiplication in between those two letters. Again, if two letters are just side by side with no symbol in between, no addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division symbol, it's assumed to be multiplication. Okay, well, now that B and H we know are multiplying each other, how do we undo that multiply by H? Well, we use inverse operations. We're going to have to divide both sides by whatever is multiplying that B. In this case, it's the letter H. So if I'm going to divide the right-hand side by the letter H, the variable H, I have to do the exact same thing on the left-hand side. So let's take a look at what that does. On the left-hand side, I'm left with just A, the area, all divided by H, the height. So A over H. Got my equal sign in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, I have an H on top and an H on the bottom. Essentially, H divided by H, any number divided by itself just cancels itself out, and it's just 1. So those are essentially gone. And look at what I'm left with, B. That was my actual goal here, was to get B by itself. So this is perfect. This is now my solution. So that letter or variable B, I'm just going to kind of switch sides here. My variable B is equal to, again, my variable A all divided by H. So this is my solution. I have rewritten that equation in terms of B, my base. Now let's take a look at this last word problem. So we're given this formula. Not worried too much about the words in this word problem, but I'll read it in just a second. We're given this formula t equals d over r. Who knows what this means? Let's not worry about it for now. And then we need to, in the last sentence it says, find the rate r. So we are rewriting this equation and trying to get r all by itself. So we're trying to get rid of this d and put it on the other side, essentially. So again, looking down below, and I'll read the question in just a second. What variable are you trying to solve for? Again, that's always located towards the beginning of the last sentence. Find the rate r. So we're trying to manipulate this equation so that r is equal to, and then everything else on the other side. So we're trying to find r, which is the rate. Okay, using what formula? What equation are you using? Hey, they gave us this equation. So t equals d over r. So let's go back and kind of read the question so we kind of know what's going on here. But technically, now that we know this, we don't really need to know the context of the question. The context is kind of unimportant. But just for the sake of kind of expanding our knowledge, Mary wants to beat John in a race. She used the formula t equals d over r to figure out how fast she needs to run in order to pass him. Find the rate, which is r, at which she needs to run. So what speed does she need to run to win the race in terms of the distance, which is d, and time, which is t, for which she runs? Okay, so let's take this equation. T equals, what is it, d over r? And again, we're trying to get r by itself. There is more than one way to solve this problem, but what I think everyone will truly understand a little better is this method. Again, we have nothing but a fraction or a ratio on the right-hand side, right? So if we do have nothing but a fraction or a ratio on the right-hand side, then make the other side of your equation, so this t, make that a fraction as well. So in order to make anything a fraction, we just divide it by 1. I have transformed this equation such that both sides are nothing but fractions. And the reason why this is wonderful is because everyone's doing really good with ratios and proportions. So now that I have a ratio, t over 1 on the left-hand side of my equation, and then a ratio of d over r on the right-hand side of my equation, with an equal sign in the middle, so these ratios are essentially proportional, I can use cross multiplication in order to solve. So the first set of cross products that I get is, let's just look at this one first. T times r. So t times r. Again, if I'm representing two variables multiplying each other, I don't have to write that multiplication in the middle. And that's equal to the cross product of my other two items. I'll try to use a different color. So my cross product of my other two items is 1 times d. Again, any number times 1 is just itself. So that's just 1 times d is just d. The question is, am I done at this point? Well, if I look back at what my goal is to solve for which variable? Oh, that's right, r. Well, r, unfortunately, is not by itself right now, so I have a little work to do. R, again, is not by itself on the left-hand side. It has the variable t right next to it. The question becomes now is, how do we get rid of that t? Well, to answer that question, you have to ask what that variable t is doing to your r. Remember, t was multiplying this variable r. So how do we undo that multiplication? We do the inverse operation of multiplication, which is division. We have to divide both sides by the coefficient or the number, in this case variable, in front of my r, and that's t. So if I divide on the left-hand side by the variable t, I also have to divide on the right-hand side by that variable t. The reason why this works out so beautifully is because on the left-hand side, you have t on top, t on the bottom. Well, t divided by itself is just 1. All of this cancels out. And on the left-hand side, I have just r. Equal sign in the middle. And then on the left-hand side, I have the variable d divided by the variable t. There's nothing you can do to simplify that. And this is my final solution. Remember, I'm trying to get r by itself. Well, here, r is finally by itself. And I've rewritten this equation such that everything is in terms of r. R is equal to, and everything else is on the right-hand side. R is equal to d over t.